Amara Walker, an 8-year-old with bright eyes and an eager smile, stepped into her new third-grade classroom at Sunnyvale Elementary for the first time. Her mother, Sophia, waved goodbye, her heart brimming with hope and dreams of a better future for her family. But as the classroom door closed behind her, neither of them could have imagined the dark journey that lay ahead. Mr. Dave Simmons, Amara's new teacher, with his neatly pressed shirt and calm, composed demeanor, was respected by everyone in the community. Parents praised him as kind but firm, and students described him as someone who meant business. Yet, behind his professional facade, he harbored a disturbing secret. A truth so chilling it would soon shatter the Walkers' world in unimaginable ways. As the days turned into weeks, Sophia's instincts as a mother began to scream that something was wrong. In this predominantly white neighborhood, where the Walkers were one of the few black families, her growing suspicions about Mr. Simmons seemed almost impossible to voice without being dismissed. Or worse. What unspeakable acts were taking place in that classroom? And how could one mother's unwavering determination to protect her child become the spark that exposed a community's most shocking secrets? Before we dive deeper into this gripping story of courage and justice, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story already has you hooked, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what happens next. The Walker family was ready for a fresh start. After years of hard work and sacrifices, Sophia and Marcus Walker had finally moved to a quiet street that seemed like the perfect place to raise their daughter, Amara. The tree-lined neighborhood promised safety, opportunity, and a better education, everything the Walkers had dreamed of providing for their child. The first week of school at Sunnyvale Elementary seemed to go smoothly, at least on the surface. Every day, Sophia greeted Amara at the door with a warm smile, eager to hear about her adventures. At dinner, Amara happily shared stories about the colorful posters in her classroom, the playground equipment, and the friends she was starting to make. She spoke about a girl named Emily who had invited her to sit at lunch and a boy named Ryan who was really good at jump rope. But whenever the conversation shifted to her teacher, Mr. Dave Simmons, Amara's tone would falter. "He's fine," Amara said one evening, focusing intently on the mashed potatoes on her plate. Sophia leaned in gently. "What do you mean by fine? Is he nice? Does he help you with your work?" Amara shrugged. "He's just okay." Sophia shared a glance with Marcus, but neither of them pressed further. After all, starting at a new school in a new neighborhood could be overwhelming for anyone, especially an 8-year-old. Maybe Amara just needed time to adjust. Over the next few days, Sophia started noticing small changes in her daughter. Amara, who used to chatter non-stop about her day, now grew quieter in the evenings. When Sophia peeked in on her during homework time, she found Amara staring blankly at her workbook more often than actually writing. At the dinner table, Amara's stories became shorter and less enthusiastic. The bright-eyed girl who used to bounce through the house now spent more time in her room with the door half closed, doodling in her notebook instead of playing outside. Sophia couldn't ignore the shift. "Are you sure everything's okay at school?" she asked one night as she tucked Amara into bed. Amara hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. "Yeah, Mom. Everything's fine." But Sophia wasn't convinced. There was a slight tremble in her daughter's voice, and her usually bright smile seemed dimmer. Something was bothering her. Sophia could feel it. At the end of the first week, Sophia decided to drop by Sunnyvale Elementary during pickup time. She wanted to get a better sense of the environment and, more importantly, of Mr. Simmons. She watched from the sidewalk as children streamed out of the school. Mr. Simmons stood near the door, his arms crossed and his eyes scanning the crowd. He seemed perfectly normal, friendly even, nodding at parents and occasionally offering a quick smile. But Sophia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her. When Amara spotted her, she ran over and hugged her tightly. "Hi, Mom. What are you doing here?" "Just wanted to surprise you," Sophia said, smiling. How was your day?" "It was okay," Amara said quickly, glancing back toward the school. Her voice was cheerful, but her grip on Sophia's hand felt tighter than usual. Sophia noticed Mr. Simmons watching them from a distance. His expression was unreadable, but the way his gaze lingered on Amara sent a chill down Sophia's spine. That weekend, Sophia brought up her concerns to Marcus. The two sat in the living room after Amara had gone to bed. "I don't know, Marcus," Sophia said, twisting the throw pillow in her hands. "She's not herself. She's so quiet now, and every time I ask about her teacher, she dodges the question." Marcus sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Soph, it's a big change for her. A new school, new friends. It's a lot to take in. Give her some time." "But what if it's more than that?" Sophia pressed. "What if something's happening at school?" Marcus gave her a reassuring smile. "You're overthinking this. Amara's tough. She'll be fine. Let's not jump to conclusions." Reluctantly, Sophia nodded, but the nagging feeling in her chest didn't go away. The following Monday, Sophia noticed another shift in Amara's behavior. She had always been the type of student who loved raising her hand in class, eager to answer any question. But when Sophia asked about her favorite subjects that evening, Amara hesitated. "Do you get to answer questions in class?" Sophia asked casually. Amara nodded but looked down at her plate. "Sometimes." "Just sometimes?" Sophia pressed. "Yeah. Sometimes Mr. Simmons skips me and calls on other kids," Amara said softly. "It's not a big deal." Sophia frowned. "Does he skip you a lot?" Amara shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe." Sophia didn't want to alarm her daughter, so she let the topic drop. But her mind raced. Was this just a coincidence, or was something more deliberate happening in that classroom? Later that week, Sophia noticed a particularly troubling moment. Amara had been struggling with a math problem at home, and when Sophia offered to help, Amara burst into tears. "I'm just not good at math," Amara cried, slamming her pencil down. "Sweetheart, that's not true," Sophia said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "You're great at math, you just need practice." "But Mr. Simmons said I wasn't trying hard enough," Amara blurted out, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He said some kids aren't cut out for this kind of work." Sophia's stomach dropped. "He said that to you?" Amara sniffled and nodded. "Yeah, but he didn't say it loud, just to me." Sophia's hands trembled as she stroked her daughter's hair. She didn't want to upset Amara further, but her mind was already racing. Why would a teacher say something so discouraging to a child? That night, after Amara had fallen asleep, Sophia confronted Marcus again. "She told me that Mr. Simmons said she wasn't trying hard enough, that she's not cut out for this," Sophia said, her voice shaking with anger. "What kind of teacher says that to a child?" Marcus frowned. "That doesn't sound great, I admit, but maybe he's just being strict. Teachers can't coddle every kid, Soph." "This isn't about being strict," Sophia snapped. "He's making her feel small. She's only 8, Marcus. This could crush her confidence." Marcus sighed. "Okay, I get it. But what do you want to do? Pull her out of the class? Confront him? We need more than just Amara's word if we're going to make a case." Sophia folded her arms, her jaw tightening. "I'm going to keep watching. Something's not right here, Marcus. I can feel it." The tipping point came at the end of that week. Amara came home unusually quiet, her shoulders slumped and her face pale. As she put her backpack down, Sophia noticed she was blinking back tears. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Sophia asked, kneeling in front of her. Amara hesitated, then finally whispered, "Mr. Simmons said some kids don't belong in this school." Sophia's heart stopped. "He said that? To you?" Amara nodded, biting her lip. "But he didn't say it to everyone, just to me, when no one else was listening." Sophia hugged her daughter tightly, her mind racing with anger and disbelief. This wasn't strictness. This wasn't about adjusting to a new school. This was something far more sinister. As Sophia held her trembling daughter, she vowed silently, whatever Mr. Simmons was hiding, she would uncover it, no matter what it took. Sophia couldn't sleep that night. Amara's words echoed in her mind. Mr. Simmons said some kids don't belong in this school. The sheer weight of those words filled her with anger, confusion, and guilt. She'd known something was wrong, but this was far worse than she'd imagined. The next morning, as Marcus headed off to work, Sophia decided to have a quiet morning with Amara. She made pancakes, Amara's favorite, and set the table with a glass of orange juice and a little flower she picked from their front yard. When Amara came downstairs, her face brightened for the first time in days. "Thanks, Mom," Amara said, sliding into her chair. Sophia smiled, sitting across from her. "You're welcome, sweetheart. I just thought we could have a special breakfast today." Amara dug in enthusiastically, her small frame relaxing a little. Sophia waited, letting the moment settle before gently steering the conversation. "So, how are things going at school?" Sophia asked casually. Amara hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air. "Okay, I guess." Sophia reached across the table, placing her hand over Amara's. "Sweetheart, you can tell me if something's wrong. You know I'm always here for you, right?" Amara looked up, her big brown eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to make trouble, Mom." Sophia's heart sank. "Trouble? You could never be trouble, Amara. But if something is happening at school, I need to know. It's my job to keep you safe." Amara bit her lip, glancing down at her plate. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Mr. Simmons, he doesn't like me." Sophia's stomach turned, but she kept her voice calm. "What makes you say that?" Amara began to recount the past few weeks. She explained how Mr. Simmons had been treating her differently, moving her seat to the back of the class even though she'd started near the front. "I can't see the board very well back there," Amara said softly, "but when I asked to move back, he said it's fine where I am." Sophia's hand tightened around her coffee mug. "What else, baby? What else has he done?" Amara hesitated again, her little hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. "Sometimes, when I raise my hand, he doesn't call on me, even if I'm the only one with my hand up." Sophia's chest tightened, but she nodded, encouraging Amara to continue. "And last week he whispered something to me after math class. He said I wasn't like the other kids and that I should try to fit in more." Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks as she spoke. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong, Mom. I'm trying really hard." Sophia moved around the table, wrapping her arms around Amara and holding her tightly. "You're not doing anything wrong, sweetheart. Not one thing. This isn't your fault." Amara sniffled, her small body trembling. "He doesn't do it to the other kids. Just me." Sophia's mind raced. She had been suspicious of Mr. Simmons from the beginning, but hearing this from Amara was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just strict, he was targeting her daughter, and it wasn't just casual negligence, it was deliberate exclusion. Sophia kissed the top of Amara's head. "Thank you for telling me, baby. I promise I'll take care of this." Amara pulled back slightly, wiping her face. "But, Mom, he said something else." Sophia frowned, her heart sinking. "What did he say?" Amara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said, if I told anyone, I'd regret it." Sophia froze, her blood boiling at those words. "He threatened you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Amara nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want to go back, Mom. I don't want to see him." Sophia held her daughter tightly again, whispering softly. "You won't have to face this alone. I promise. We're going to fix this." Later that evening, Sophia sat Marcus down to share everything Amara had told her. She recounted every word, her voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. Marcus listened, his brow furrowed. When she finished, he let out a long sigh and shook his head. "Sophia, I don't know. This doesn't sound great, but are you sure we're not jumping to conclusions? Sophia's eyes widened. Jumping to conclusions? Marcus, he moved her to the back of the class, ignores her, whispers things to her, and now he's threatening her. How is that not a problem? Marcus rubbed his temples. Look, I'm not saying it's okay, but maybe he's just strict and doesn't realize how it's coming across. Teachers are under a lot of pressure. I just think we need to approach this carefully. Carefully? Sophia snapped. Marcus, our daughter is crying herself to sleep because of this man. What's it going to take for you to see this isn't normal? Marcus stood, pacing the living room. I get that you're upset, but I also know how these things can get blown out of proportion. If we go in there guns blazing, we could make things worse. Sophia crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. Worse? Worse than our daughter being bullied by her own teacher? I just think we need more than Amara's word, Marcus said. If we're going to accuse a respected teacher of something this serious, we need proof. Sophia felt a wave of frustration wash over her. Proof? What kind of proof do you need, Marcus? Do you need to see her break down again? Or are you waiting for him to do something even worse? Marcus held up his hands, trying to calm her. That's not what I meant. I don't want to make a scene unless we're sure. Sophia shook her head, her voice firm. Well, I am sure, and if you're not going to help, I'll handle it myself. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the middle of the living room, looking conflicted. As Sophia lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind raced with possibilities. She didn't know exactly how she was going to confront Mr. Simmons or the school, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let this go. Her daughter's safety and happiness were at stake, and Sophia was willing to do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant going against the system alone. Sophia couldn't sit idle anymore. Amara's trembling voice and the words, "You'll regret it," echoed in her mind. She knew she had to see things for herself. Sophia called the school under the pretense of volunteering for class activities, hoping it would give her the chance to observe Mr. Simmons in action. When the day came, Sophia entered Sunnyvale Elementary feeling a mix of nerves and determination. The bright hallways were adorned with student artwork and motivational posters, but beneath the cheerful facade, Sophia sensed an undercurrent of something less wholesome. She was escorted to Mr. Simmons's class, where she would be assisting with a small reading activity. Mr. Simmons greeted her with a polite but detached demeanor. "Mrs. Walker, thank you for helping today," he said. "I hope you'll find everything running smoothly." Sophia nodded, taking a seat at the back of the classroom. She was there to observe, not to confront, at least not yet. The lesson began, and Mr. Simmons moved through the classroom with what seemed to be practiced ease. He called on students to answer questions, praised some for their work, and redirected others with gentle corrections. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but Sophia quickly noticed a pattern. Amara, seated near the back of the class, raised her hand multiple times during the lesson. Each time, Mr. Simmons scanned the room and deliberately skipped over her, calling instead on students who hadn't even raised their hands. When Amara hesitated during a group activity, he spoke to her in a tone sharp enough to draw the attention of her classmates. "That's not how we do it here, Amara," he said, his voice dripping with disapproval. "You need to try harder to keep up." Sophia's stomach churned. There was no outright cruelty, no yelling or name-calling, but the subtle ways in which he isolated Amara were unmistakable. She also noticed something else. Another student, a boy named Isaac, who appeared to be the only other black child in the class, received similar treatment. His seat was far from the rest of the group, and Mr. Simmons barely acknowledged him throughout the lesson. During recess, Sophia approached one of the teacher's aides who had been assisting in the class. She introduced herself and casually brought up Mr. Simmons. "He seems very structured," Sophia said carefully. The aide hesitated, glancing toward the playground. "He's thorough," she said after a pause. "He has his way of doing things." Sophia didn't push further, But the aide's response left her feeling unsettled. It wasn't what she said, it was the hesitation, the unspoken discomfort in her tone. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that others might have noticed Mr. Simmons's behavior but were reluctant to speak up. After class ended, Sophia lingered. Mr. Simmons approached her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Was everything to your satisfaction today?" he asked with a thin smile. Sophia took a deep breath. "Actually, I have some concerns." His smile faltered. "Concerns? About what?" "About how Amara is being treated in class," Sophia said, her voice steady. "I noticed she's being overlooked during lessons. And your tone with her, it's different from how you speak to the other kids." Mr. Simmons's expression hardened. "Mrs. Walker, I treat all my students equally. If Amara feels otherwise, perhaps it's a misunderstanding." Sophia's anger flared. "A misunderstanding? She told me you've made her feel like she doesn't belong here. That's not something an 8-year-old imagines." Mr. Simmons sighed, glancing around as if to ensure no one else was listening. "I think your daughter may be overly sensitive, Mrs. Walker. Sometimes children misinterpret feedback." "Misinterpret?" Sophia's voice rose slightly. "She's been moved to the back of the class, ignored, and made to feel unwelcome. That's not feedback. That's targeted behavior." Mr. Simmons raised his hands defensively. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I can assure you I've done nothing wrong. If Amara is struggling, I suggest we work together to help her adjust rather than jump to accusations." Sophia could barely contain her frustration. "We're done here," she said coldly, turning on her heel and walking away. As she made her way toward the exit, still fuming, a voice stopped her. "Mrs. Walker?" Sophia turned to see a woman standing near the hallway bulletin board. She recognized her from the drop-off line, a fellow parent. The woman hesitated, glancing around before stepping closer. "I couldn't help but overhear," the woman said quietly. "You're not the first parent to notice something's off with Mr. Simmons." Sophia's heart raced. "What do you mean?" The woman lowered her voice even further. "My son was in his class last year. We had similar concerns. Being ignored, singled out. But when we brought it up to the school, they brushed it off. Told us Mr. Simmons was one of their best teachers." Sophia's breath caught. "Why didn't you push harder?" The woman looked away, her face tense with regret. "We didn't want to make waves. We thought it'd be easier to just transfer him to another teacher, but if this is still happening—" She trailed off, her eyes filled with worry. Sophia placed a hand on the woman's arm. "It's happening," she said firmly, "and I'm not letting it slide. Not this time." As Sophia walked to her car, her determination solidified. She wasn't just fighting for Amara anymore. She was fighting for every child who had been mistreated, ignored, or made to feel small under Mr. Simmons' watch. If the school wouldn't listen, she'd make them, whatever it took. Sophia spent the weekend replaying her conversation with the other parent over and over in her mind. It wasn't just Amara. Other children had experienced similar treatment from Mr. Simmons, and nothing had been done. The idea that the school had ignored these complaints fueled Sophia's determination. She decided it was time to dig deeper. On Monday morning, Sophia started making discreet calls to other parents in the neighborhood, particularly families of minority children. The responses she received were a mix of hesitation and frustration. Some parents were reluctant to talk, afraid of stirring up trouble or being labeled as difficult. Others, however, opened up once Sophia explained her situation. One father, whose son had been in Mr. Simmons's class 2 years prior, shared a troubling story. "My boy would come home every day saying Mr. Simmons treated him differently," the man said. "He'd skip over him in class, dismiss his answers, and even made comments about how he needed to learn how to sit still and follow rules. But when I brought it up to the principal, they just said Mr. Simmons had high standards. Nothing ever came of it." A mother of twin girls shared a similar experience. "He separated my daughters on purpose," she said. "They'd been sitting together since kindergarten, but he insisted they'd learn better apart. One of them thrived, but the other struggled all year. She still hates math because of how he treated her." By the end of the day, Sophia had compiled a list of families with grievances against Mr. Simmons. It wasn't just a one-off problem. It was a pattern. Worse, every parent she spoke to said the same thing. Their complaints had been dismissed or swept under the rug by the school administration. That evening, as Marcus walked through the door, Sophia handed him the list. "This isn't just about Amara," she said, her voice firm. "Look at this. All these families have stories about him. He's been doing this for years." Marcus scanned the list, his expression grim. "And the school did nothing?" "Nothing," Sophia said bitterly. "They've been protecting him, probably because he's been there so long and they don't want to admit there's a problem." Marcus let out a deep sigh and sat down at the kitchen table. "So, what's the plan?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "I'm going to take this to the principal. They can't ignore this anymore. If they try, I'll go to the district, and if that doesn't work, I'll take it public." Marcus nodded, his reluctance from before replaced with resolve. "You're right. This can't keep happening." The next day, Sophia was ready to meet with the principal. But before she could leave, Amara came home from school looking more upset than Sophia had ever seen her. She slammed her backpack onto the floor and ran straight to her room, tears streaming down her face. "Amara!" Sophia called, rushing after her. She found her daughter curled up on the bed, sobbing into her pillow. "What happened, baby?" Sophia asked, sitting beside her and gently rubbing her back. "Did something happen at school?" Amara didn't answer at first. Then, between sobs, she managed to say, "Mr. Simmons, he made fun of me." Sophia's heart dropped. "What do you mean, sweetie? What did he say?" Amara wiped her eyes and sat up, still trembling. "We were talking about where everyone's families come from, and I said I'm African American. He said, 'Well, maybe that's why you're having a hard time keeping up in class.'" Everyone laughed, Mom. Everyone. Sophia's chest tightened with fury. "He said that? In front of the whole class?" Amara nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to disappear. I didn't even say anything for the rest of the day." Sophia pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her anger boiling beneath the surface. "I'm so sorry, Amara. You didn't deserve that, not any of it, and I promise you, this ends now." After calming Amara down, Sophia returned to the kitchen to gather her thoughts. She decided to go through Amara's backpack to see if there was anything else from school she needed to address. As she pulled out worksheets and notebooks, a loose piece of paper caught her attention. It was a note written in red ink, with sharp, angry handwriting that immediately set her on edge. The words sent a chill down her spine. "Amara needs to focus more and stop being such a distraction. Perhaps if she spent less time daydreaming, she'd actually belong here." The note was signed, Mr. Simmons. Sophia's hands shook as she stared at the paper. This wasn't just inappropriate, it was targeted bullying from the very person who was supposed to support her child. She knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, systemic issue. And now, she had proof. With the note in one hand and her phone in the other, Sophia dialed the school's number, ready to demand a meeting with the principal. And this time, she wasn't leaving until something was done. Sophia stormed into Sunnyvale Elementary the next morning, the note from the Mr. Simmons clenched tightly in her hand. Her heart was racing, a mix of anger and determination propelling her forward. She had called ahead and insisted on an urgent meeting with Principal Evelyn Patterson, who reluctantly agreed to see her before the school day started. Principal Patterson's office was as polished and professional as the woman herself. Framed diplomas hung neatly on the walls, and a faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Patterson, a woman in her early 50s with a sharp blazer and an even sharper gaze, greeted Sophia with a tight smile. "Mrs. Walker, please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "How can I help you this morning?" Sophia didn't sit. She placed the note on the desk in front of the principal. "This is how Mr. Simmons is treating my daughter." Patterson glanced at the note, her expression unreadable, then picked it up and adjusted her glasses. After a moment, she placed it back down with a sigh. "Mrs. Walker, I understand your concern, but Mr. Simmons is one of our most respected teachers. He's been with us for over 15 years and has always maintained a high standard for his students." Sophia's jaw tightened. "A high standard doesn't justify singling out my daughter, moving her to the back of the class, ignoring her, or making inappropriate comments about her background. And now this?" She pointed to the note. "This is bullying, plain and simple." Patterson leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "I think you might be misunderstanding Mr. Simmons's intentions. He's a firm teacher, yes, but he pushes his students because he believes in their potential. Perhaps Amara is feeling overwhelmed by his expectations." Sophia's anger flared. "Overwhelmed? He told my daughter in front of her classmates that she doesn't belong. That's not firm, that's cruel." Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Did Mr. Simmons say those exact words, or is this how Amara interpreted them?" Sophia's fists clenched at her sides. "Are you seriously trying to gaslight me right now? My daughter is 8 years old. She didn't imagine being humiliated in front of her classmates, and she certainly didn't write that note to herself." The principal sighed, her tone shifting to one of forced patience. "Mrs. Walker, I understand this is an emotional topic for you, but we need to approach this with perspective. Mr. Simmons is a pillar of this community. He's taught hundreds of students who've gone on to excel academically. I've never had a single formal complaint against him. Because every parent who's spoken up has been ignored," Sophia cut in. "I've talked to other families. I know I'm not the first person to come to you about this." Patterson's expression hardened, a crack in her polished facade. "Mrs. Walker, if you're unhappy with Mr. Simmons's teaching methods, perhaps we can explore transferring Amara to another classroom, but I will not entertain unfounded accusations against one of our best educators." Sophia took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "This isn't about transferring my daughter. This is about holding Mr. Simmons accountable, and if you're not willing to do that, I'll take this to the school district." Principal Patterson's eyes narrowed. "You're free to do so, but I'll remind you that baseless claims can have serious repercussions, not just for teachers but for families as well." Sophia stared at the principal, her resolve only strengthening. "Thank you for your time," she said curtly, grabbing the note from the desk and walking out. As Sophia exited the office, her anger simmered. She'd expected resistance, but Patterson's complete dismissal of her concerns was infuriating. This wasn't just about Mr. Simmons anymore. It was clear the administration was complicit in protecting him. If she was going to fight this, she'd need more than just stories and a single note. She'd need evidence that couldn't be ignored. Sophia decided to stay at the school that morning under the guise of volunteering again. She helped set up the book fair in the library, but her real focus was on gathering information. During her time there, she observed Mr. Simmons briefly interacting with his students in the hallway. His tone with Amara was cold and dismissive, while he greeted other students warmly. It was subtle, but unmistakable. At one point, as Sophia passed by the staff lounge, she heard voices inside. She slowed her steps, recognizing the clipped tone of Principal Patterson. She stopped just outside the door, her heart pounding as she strained to hear the conversation. "I don't want this getting out of hand," Patterson was saying. "The Walkers are already stirring things up. We need to make sure this doesn't turn into a bigger issue." "And what do you suggest?" Another voice replied, one Sophia recognized immediately as Mr. Simmons. "The mother is overreacting. Her daughter misinterpreted a few situations, and now she's creating drama." "She's persistent," Patterson said. "If she goes to the district, it'll be a headache for all of us. Let's make sure she feels like she's being heard without actually giving her anything to escalate." Sophia's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to barge into the room and confront them right then and there, but she forced herself to keep walking. They didn't know she'd overheard them, and she could use that to her advantage. Back in the library, Sophia's mind raced. The administration wasn't just protecting Mr. Simmons. They were actively working to cover for him and discredit her family. They'd underestimated her, assuming she'd back down like so many others had. But they were wrong. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sophia spent the next several days focused on building a case. She knew the principal's strategy was to minimize her concerns and silence her efforts, but that only fueled her determination. If she could gather solid proof of Mr. Simmons' behavior, neither the administration nor the district could dismiss her. Her first step was speaking directly to students. She approached parents she trusted, explaining her concerns about Mr. Simmons and asking if she could talk to their children. Some were hesitant at first, worried about retaliation or drawing attention to their families, but Sophia's sincerity convinced a few to let their kids speak. Sophia set up casual conversations in her living room, asking open-ended questions about how the children felt in Mr. Simmons's class. The stories they shared painted a disturbing pattern. One student, a shy girl named Ava, described how Mr. Simmons constantly skipped over her in group discussions, even when she raised her hand. Another boy, Isaac, the only other black student in Amara's class, revealed that Mr. Simmons had scolded him for talking too loudly during a class activity while ignoring louder groups of other students. Isaac's mother, who joined the conversation, added her own frustration. "We complained about him last year, but they brushed us off," she said. "They said he was strict, but fair. I didn't push it because I didn't want to make things worse for Isaac. But now, I wish I had." Sophia recorded the testimonies with permission, compiling a growing list of examples of Mr. Simmons' subtle but consistent biases. She also began researching the school's records, digging for any information about prior complaints against him. What she found shocked her. Buried deep in online forums and parent discussions were mentions of other incidents. Complaints made to the school about Mr. Simmons's treatment of minority students, all of which had been swept under the rug. At home, Amara's condition continued to deteriorate. She was quieter than ever, reluctant to share anything about her school day. When Sophia pressed gently, Amara revealed that Mr. Simmons had started punishing her openly. "He gave me detention today," Amara said one evening, staring down at her dinner plate. Sophia frowned. "For what?" Amara hesitated. "He said I wasn't paying attention in class." Sophia exchanged a sharp look with Marcus, who was sitting across the table. "Were you not paying attention?" Marcus asked gently. "I was," Amara said, her voice trembling. "I answered his question, but he said it wasn't the right way and told me to stay after class." Sophia's hands curled into fists. "Did anyone else get detention?" Amara shook her head. "No, just me." Marcus sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. He'd been reluctant to get involved, hesitant to accuse a respected teacher without undeniable proof. But seeing Amara's tears and hearing her soft, defeated voice was enough to change his mind. "We can't let this continue," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Soph, I'm with you now. Whatever we need to do, I'll help." Sophia nodded, her determination renewed. With Marcus on her side, she knew they had the strength to push forward. They couldn't wait for the administration to act. They had to force their hand. Sophia stayed up late that night, organizing her evidence and reaching out to parents she hadn't yet spoken to. With Marcus helping her make calls and review testimonies, they were able to uncover more accounts of mistreatment. Some recent, others years old. Together, they built a case so strong it would be impossible to ignore. But just as they started to feel progress, Amara dropped a chilling revelation the next morning before school. "Mom," she said quietly, pulling on her backpack, "Mr. Simmons told me yesterday he knows you've been talking to people." Sophia froze. "What do you mean?" "He said if my mom keeps causing trouble, I'm going to stay in detention every day until I learn to behave," Amara whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. Sophia's heart sank, her fury bubbling just below the surface. She knelt to Amara's level and hugged her tightly. "Sweetheart, listen to me. You've done nothing wrong. This is not your fault. I promise I'll handle this." Amara sniffled, her small frame trembling. "I just want it to stop, Mom." Sophia's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about addressing past wrongs or subtle biases anymore. Mr. Simmons was now actively retaliating. He had to be stopped, and Sophia wouldn't rest until he was. Sophia knew it was time to escalate. With Marcus fully on board and their evidence meticulously compiled, they filed an official complaint with the school district. It was a detailed document that outlined Mr. Simmons' pattern of discrimination, supported by testimonies from other parents and students. Sophia included the note from Mr. Simmons, recordings of other families' accounts, and her observations from volunteering in the classroom. When the district received the complaint, they responded quickly. A meeting was scheduled with the district representative, Principal Patterson, Mr. Simmons, and the Walkers. Sophia felt a mix of determination and apprehension as she prepared for what she knew would be a contentious confrontation. The day of the meeting, Sophia and Marcus sat in the conference room, their hands clasped tightly together. The district representative, a woman named Dr. Angela Hayes, seemed professional and neutral, taking notes as Sophia presented her case. Patterson, on the other hand, looked defensive, and Mr. Simmons sat with a thin, composed smile. Sophia didn't hold back. She laid out everything: the testimonies from other families, Amara's experiences, and Mr. Simmons's retaliatory actions. "This is not a case of strict teaching," Sophia said firmly. "This is targeted discrimination and bullying." Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Simmons, do you have a response to these allegations?" Mr. Simmons leaned forward, his demeanor calm. "These accusations are baseless. I treat all of my students equally. If Amara or her parents feel otherwise, it's unfortunate, but their perception does not reflect reality." Patterson quickly added, "Mr. Simmons has been with this school for 15 years. He's consistently received positive evaluations, and we've never had a formal complaint until now." Sophia's anger flared. "Because every other family was ignored or silenced. That doesn't mean the complaints weren't there. It means you refused to address them." As the tension in the room grew, Mr. Simmons delivered a blow that shocked everyone. "Since we're discussing Amara, I think it's relevant to mention that she recently submitted an assignment with answers copied directly from another student's work. It raises questions about her honesty and whether this family is truly acting in good faith." Sophia's jaw dropped. "Are you accusing my daughter of cheating?" Mr. Simmons shrugged, feigning sympathy. "I'm merely pointing out the facts." Marcus stood abruptly, his voice cold. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. You're trying to discredit an 8-year-old to protect yourself." Dr. Hayes raised her hand, signaling for calm. "Let's take a step back. I'll need to review all evidence, including this alleged assignment, before drawing any conclusions." Sophia seethed silently, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. She knew Mr. Simmons was lying, but proving it would be another uphill battle. Later that evening, as Sophia sat at home replaying the meeting in her head, her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered. "Mrs. Walker?" a soft voice asked. "Yes, this is Sophia," she replied cautiously. "This is Rachel, the teacher's aide in Mr. Simmons's class. I've been following what's happening with Amara, and I need to tell you something." Sophia's pulse quickened. "Go on." Rachel hesitated, then said, "I've seen things I should have reported sooner. Mr. Simmons has been targeting certain students for years, especially minority kids. He's careful, though. Subtle enough that it's hard to prove, but not subtle enough to hide it from someone who works with him every day." Sophia's voice trembled with hope. "Can you back this up?" "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "I've been keeping records, notes on what he says and how he treats students. I also have copies of emails between him and Principal Patterson discussing ways to downplay complaints from parents. Sophia's breath caught. "Rachel, this could change everything." "I know," Rachel said. "That's why I'm willing to share it. Amara deserves better, and so do all the other kids he's mistreated." Sophia gripped the phone tightly, her resolve stronger than ever. "Thank you. Let's meet as soon as possible." Rachel's voice softened. "We'll stop him, Mrs. Walker, I promise." As Sophia hung up, a surge of determination coursed through her. The tide was finally turning. With Rachel's proof, she was ready to take the fight to the next level. This wasn't just about Amara anymore. It was about ensuring no child would ever face this kind of treatment again. The following day, Sophia met Rachel, the teacher's aide, at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. Rachel, a young woman with a nervous demeanor, arrived clutching a folder and a flash drive. Her hands trembled as she set them on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," Rachel said, her voice low. "I've been debating whether to come forward for a long time, but after seeing what he's doing to Amara, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Sophia gave her a reassuring smile. "You're doing the right thing. Whatever happens, you're helping bring justice for Amara and so many other kids." Rachel opened the folder, revealing meticulously documented notes. "I've been keeping track of Mr. Simmons's behavior for over a year," she began. "He singles out certain students, mostly minority kids, for stricter discipline. He ignores them in class, embarrasses them in front of their peers, and penalizes them more harshly than others for minor mistakes." Sophia scanned the notes, her heart sinking as she read example after example of Mr. Simmons's targeted behavior. Rachel also handed her the flash drive. "These are recordings of conversations I've overheard. Some are between Mr. Simmons and students, but the most damning ones are between him and Principal Patterson. They talk openly about handling complaints and dismissing parents like you." Sophia's breath caught. "You recorded them discussing this?" Rachel nodded. "It was risky, but I knew someone had to document what was really happening. You'll hear them strategizing about how to protect Mr. Simmons and discredit parents who complain." Sophia clutched the flash drive. "This is exactly what we need. Thank you, Rachel. This could change everything." Rachel's expression softened. "I just want the truth to come out. Kids like Amara deserve better." Sophia wasted no time. She and Marcus submitted Rachel's evidence to the district immediately, attaching the recordings and notes to their formal complaint. This time, the district couldn't ignore them. Within 48 hours, Mr. Simmons was suspended pending an investigation. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Parents began whispering at school pickups, trying to piece together what had happened. Some supported the Walkers, grateful that someone had finally spoken up. Others, however, rallied around Mr. Simmons, claiming the accusations were baseless and motivated by a desire to stir up trouble. Sophia was bombarded with mixed reactions. Some parents approached her privately, thanking her for her courage and sharing their own experiences with Mr. Simmons, but others were openly hostile. One woman cornered her in the parking lot and spat, "You're ruining a good man's career because your daughter couldn't handle a little discipline." Sophia refused to back down. "This isn't about discipline, it's about discrimination. If you don't believe me now, just wait. The truth is coming out." As the investigation gained momentum, the school district announced a community meeting to address the growing controversy. It was to be held in the school's gymnasium, with parents, teachers, and district officials invited to attend. Tensions were high in the days leading up to the meeting, with rumors swirling on social media and in neighborhood groups. When the night of the meeting arrived, Sophia and Marcus walked into the gymnasium with their heads held high. The room was packed with parents, some glaring at them, others offering encouraging nods. At the front of the room sat Dr. Hayes, the district representative, flanked by Principal Patterson and Mr. Simmons, who looked noticeably less composed than usual. Dr. Hayes opened the meeting with a brief statement. "Thank you all for coming. We understand there have been serious allegations made against Mr. Simmons, and we are here to provide transparency and address your concerns. Let's keep this discussion civil and focused on the facts. Sophia was one of the first to speak. She stood and addressed the crowd, her voice steady but impassioned. "This isn't just about my daughter," she began. "This is about years of mistreatment that have gone unchecked. Mr. Simmons has targeted minority students, isolating them, belittling them, and making them feel like they don't belong. And the school administration has ignored every single complaint." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement while others shook their heads in disbelief. One man stood up and shouted, "Mr. Simmons has been a great teacher for my kids. This is a witch hunt." Another parent countered, "Maybe your kids didn't experience it, but mine did. My son came home crying because of how Mr. Simmons treated him." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, parents arguing on both sides. Dr. Hayes banged a gavel to restore order. "Please, let's allow everyone to speak." Sophia played one of the recordings Rachel had provided. The room fell silent as Mr. Simmons's voice echoed through the speakers, dismissing a parent's complaint as hysterical nonsense, and saying, "These parents just want excuses for their kids' failures." Sophia turned to face the crowd. "This is the man some of you are defending, a man who mocks parents behind closed doors and bullies children he deems unworthy. Is this who you want teaching your kids?" Dr. Hayes spoke next. "We've reviewed the evidence, and while the investigation is ongoing, the district finds the accusations credible enough to suspend Mr. Simmons indefinitely. Further actions will be determined based on the final findings." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Mr. Simmons stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "I've done nothing wrong." But his voice was drowned out by the uproar. Parents shouted over each other, some demanding accountability, others defending him. Sophia exchanged a glance with Marcus, their resolve unshaken despite the chaos. As the meeting ended, Sophia walked out of the gymnasium feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. The truth was coming to light, but the battle wasn't over. Mr. Simmons's defenders weren't going to give up easily, and she knew there was still a long road ahead. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. They'd taken a significant step toward justice, and there was no turning back. The fallout from the meeting at Sunnyvale Elementary was immediate and intense. By the next morning, the Walkers were the talk of the neighborhood. Some parents reached out to thank them for standing up to Mr. Simmons, but others were openly hostile. The streets that once felt quiet and peaceful now carried an air of tension. Sophia first noticed the shift when she went outside to water the flowers in her front yard. A neighbor who usually greeted her with a smile walked by without even a glance. Another neighbor, Mr. Davis, stood across the street, glaring openly before shaking his head and walking back inside. Inside the house, Amara sat quietly at the kitchen table, doodling in her notebook. She was drawing a picture of her and Sophia, smiling under a tree. Sophia's heart broke seeing how Amara was trying to process everything. Marcus came into the kitchen and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "We knew this was coming," he said. "People are picking sides." "It's just hard," Sophia replied. "Some of these people have been so friendly since we moved here. Now it feels like they're strangers." The backlash wasn't limited to icy stares. Over the next few days, the Walkers received passive-aggressive comments from parents at school pickup. One mother muttered loud enough for Sophia to hear, "Some people just don't know how to fit in around here." Another parent openly questioned why the Walkers had moved to the neighborhood in the first place, suggesting they might be happier somewhere else. But not all reactions were negative. A growing number of families came forward, sharing stories of how their own children had experienced similar treatment from Mr. Simmons or other school staff. One mother, Mrs. Patel, told Sophia about how her son was reprimanded for speaking his native language during recess. Another father, Mr. Morales, described how his daughter was often assigned extra work as punishment for talking in class, even though her classmates were doing the same thing. "These issues are bigger than just Mr. Simmons," Mrs. Patel said during a coffee meetup Sophia organized. "There's something wrong with the way this school handles kids who aren't white." Sophia nodded, taking notes as parents shared their experiences. "We need to bring this to the district," she said. "They need to know it's not an isolated incident." As more families rallied behind the Walkers, the conversations began shifting from Mr. Simmons to the larger systemic issues within Sunnyvale Elementary. Many parents started demanding changes. More diverse hiring, better cultural sensitivity training, and stronger accountability for teachers. But as their movement gained traction, so did the pushback. One evening, as Sophia was putting Amara to bed, there was a knock at the door. Marcus answered, and Sophia heard voices rising in the hallway. When she walked out to investigate, she found Mr. Davis from across the street standing on their doorstep, his face red with anger. "This whole thing is getting out of hand," Mr. Davis said, jabbing a finger toward Marcus. "Do you realize what you're doing to this community? People are upset. You're ruining a good man's career over your daughter's feelings." Sophia stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "Our daughter's feelings matter. So do the feelings of every child who has been mistreated by that man." Mr. Davis scoffed. "Mistreated? Or disciplined? Maybe if parents like you taught your kids some respect, we wouldn't even be in this mess." Marcus moved forward, his posture rigid. "This conversation is over," he said, closing the door firmly in Mr. Davis's face. Sophia turned to Marcus, her chest tight. "It's getting worse." Marcus nodded. "But we're not backing down." The real blow came 2 days later. Amara came home from school, her face pale and her hands shaking. She handed Sophia an envelope that had been stuffed into her backpack. "What's this, sweetheart?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle. Amara shrugged, her lip trembling. "I don't know. I didn't see who put it there." Sophia opened the envelope, her stomach sinking as she read the note inside. The words, written in bold black letters, sent a chill down her spine. "Stop stirring up trouble, or you'll regret it. Drop this now and keep quiet." Sophia felt her hand shake as she passed the letter to Marcus. His face darkened as he read it. "This is a threat." Amara's voice quivered. "What does it mean, Mom? Are we in trouble?" Sophia knelt down and held her daughter tightly. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. This is just someone who's scared of the truth coming out." But as she comforted Amara, Sophia felt her resolve harden. Whoever had sent the letter was trying to intimidate them into silence. That meant they were getting closer to exposing the truth, and whoever was responsible knew it. Sophia looked at Marcus. "We're not stopping," she said firmly. "If they think this will scare us off, they're wrong. We're just getting started." Sophia and Marcus knew the anonymous threat meant one thing. They were on the right path. The note wasn't going to intimidate them. It only strengthened their resolve. After consulting with a civil rights attorney, the Walkers filed a formal lawsuit against the school district and Mr. Simmons for racial discrimination, harassment, and creating a hostile learning environment. Their lawyer, Karen Mitchell, was a no-nonsense advocate who had taken on several cases involving systemic bias in schools. "This isn't just about Amara," Karen said during their first meeting. "It's about every child who has been overlooked, humiliated, or mistreated. We're going to make sure they're held accountable." The lawsuit quickly became a local news story, and the Walkers found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Interviews, community debates, and even social media posts divided the neighborhood further. Some parents rallied around them, while others accused them of tarnishing the reputation of a respected teacher and school. Amara, though shielded from much of the public attention, felt the pressure. She became quieter, withdrawn, and hesitant to return to school. Sophia and Marcus knew they had to be strong, not just for her, but for the other families who had come forward. The case proceeded to trial 6 months later. The courtroom was packed with parents, teachers, and community members eager to hear the details. The Walkers sat with Karen at their side, while Mr. Simmons and his attorney occupied the defense table. Principal Patterson, acting as a representative of the school district, sat stiffly nearby. Karen began the trial with a powerful opening statement. "This case is not about one student's experience," she said, her voice firm. "It's about a pattern of discrimination, a culture of silence, and a school system that has failed its most vulnerable students." Over the course of several days, Karen called a series of witnesses who painted a damning picture of Mr. Simmons' behavior. Parents testified about their children's experiences, describing how he ignored, isolated, or belittled minority students. Some broke down in tears as they recounted how their children came home feeling humiliated and unworthy. One particularly powerful testimony came from Rachel, the teacher's aide who had provided key evidence. "I worked alongside Mr. Simmons for 2 years," Rachel said. "I saw him consistently treat certain students differently. He made subtle comments, used a harsher tone, and held them to standards he didn't apply to others." Karen played several of Rachel's recordings for the courtroom. In one, Mr. Simmons could be heard mocking a student's effort, saying, "Some kids just don't have what it takes." In another, he told Principal Patterson, "Parents like the Walkers always look for someone to blame when their kid can't cut it." The recordings were damning, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. When it was the defense's turn, Mr. Simmons's attorney tried to paint him as a dedicated educator whose methods were being misinterpreted. "Mr. Simmons has taught at Sunnyvale Elementary for over 15 years, the attorney argued. "He has helped hundreds of students achieve academic success. This lawsuit is based on isolated incidents that have been blown out of proportion." Mr. Simmons himself took the stand, maintaining a calm and composed demeanor. "I've always held my students to the same high standards," he said. "If Amara or her parents felt differently, I regret that, but I never intended to harm or single out any student." Karen's cross-examination, however, was relentless. She pressed him on the note he had written to Amara, the comments he made in Rachel's recordings, and his history of ignoring complaints. By the time he stepped down, cracks had begun to show in his confident facade. Amara's testimony was the most difficult moment of the trial. Sitting in the witness box, her small frame seemed even smaller under the weight of so many eyes. But with Sophia and Marcus watching supportively from the front row, she found the courage to speak. "He made me feel like I wasn't good enough," Amara said quietly. "He said I didn't belong, and he made me stay in detention even when I didn't do anything wrong." Karen gently guided Amara through her testimony, ensuring she felt safe while recounting her experiences. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. In the trial's final days, Karen delivered a closing argument that tied everything together. "This case isn't just about one teacher's actions," she said. "It's about a school system that allowed those actions to continue unchecked. The evidence is clear. Mr. Simmons created a hostile environment for certain students, and the administration turned a blind eye. It's time to hold them accountable." The defense countered with their own argument, emphasizing Mr. Simmons' long career and questioning the motives of the families who had come forward, but the weight of the evidence against him was undeniable. The trial concluded, and the jury retired to deliberate. Sophia and Marcus sat in the courtroom, their hands tightly clasped as they waited for the verdict. The minutes felt like hours, every second stretching painfully. Parents and community members whispered anxiously, the tension thick in the air. Amara sat beside her parents, clutching a small stuffed bear Sophia had given her for comfort. "What if they don't believe us?" she whispered. "They will," Sophia said, her voice steady. "We told the truth. That's all we can do." As the jury deliberated, Sophia and Marcus exchanged a determined look. No matter what the verdict, they knew they had taken a stand, not just for Amara, but for every child who had suffered in silence. And now, all they could do was wait. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their expressions solemn. Sophia clutched Marcus's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. Amara sat between them, holding her stuffed bear tightly, her small fingers white-knuckled with tension. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as the judge entered the room and took her seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked, her voice steady. A woman in the front row of the jury stood, holding a folded piece of paper. "We have, Your Honor." The room seemed to hold its breath as the verdict was read. In the matter of Walker v. Sunnyvale School District and David Simmons, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The jury has determined that the defendants engaged in discriminatory practices and created a hostile learning environment, violating the civil rights of the plaintiff. Sophia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Marcus squeezed her hand tightly, his face a mixture of relief and determination. Amara looked up at her parents, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hope. The judge continued. The court orders the school district to implement immediate corrective measures, including mandatory diversity training for all staff and a review of disciplinary practices. Furthermore, Mr. Simmons is permanently barred from teaching in any capacity. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Simmons sat frozen, his face pale. Principal Patterson shifted uncomfortably, her usual composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the ruling. Sophia looked at Amara and whispered, "We did it, baby. We stood up for what's right." The days following the verdict marked the beginning of change for Sunnyvale Elementary and the wider community. The school district, under scrutiny from both the court and the public, announced a series of reforms aimed at addressing systemic bias. Diversity training sessions became mandatory for all staff, and new policies were put in place to ensure that every complaint from students or parents would be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Principal Patterson announced her early retirement shortly after the ruling, citing personal reasons. Her departure was met with mixed reactions, but many parents saw it as a necessary step toward rebuilding trust in the administration. As for Mr. Simmons, his teaching license was revoked, and he left town quietly. His departure marked the end of a long chapter of harm for many families and the beginning of healing for the school. The Walkers became symbols of resilience in their community. Families who had been too afraid to speak up before now felt empowered to share their stories. Sophia and Marcus found themselves in the role of mentors, helping others navigate the challenges of standing up to injustice. One afternoon, as they were settling in for a quiet weekend, there was a knock at their door. Marcus opened it to find a couple standing on the porch, their nervous expressions reminiscent of how Sophia and Marcus had felt months earlier. Between them stood a young girl, no older than Amara, clutching a notebook. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker?" the man asked hesitantly. "That's us," Marcus replied. "How can we help?" The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "We heard about what you did, for your daughter and for other kids. We need help. Our son is facing something similar, and we don't know where to start." Sophia appeared behind Marcus, her face softening as she recognized the fear and determination in the couple's eyes. "Come in," she said gently. "Let's talk." As the family stepped inside, Sophia glanced at Marcus and Amara. This fight had been difficult, but it had also shown them the power of speaking up and the impact it could have on others. Their story wasn't just their own anymore. It was part of a larger movement for justice, one family at a time. With the lawsuit behind them and justice served, the Walkers focused on restoring a sense of normalcy for Amara. The reforms at Sunnyvale Elementary brought visible changes: a new principal, revised policies, and a more inclusive environment. Teachers underwent diversity training, and the school board pledged to prioritize equity moving forward. Though the journey had been exhausting, Sophia and Marcus knew it was worth it. Amara began to thrive again, her spark slowly returning. The support from her family, combined with encouragement from new friends, helped her regain her confidence. She joined the school's art club, her drawings reflecting a renewed sense of joy and creativity. When Sophia asked her how she felt about going to school now, Amara replied with a smile, "It feels better. Like I belong." Sophia and Marcus stayed active in community reform efforts, helping to shape ongoing changes in the school district. They attended board meetings, worked with other families to ensure their voices were heard, and continued advocating for policies that would prevent future discrimination. One afternoon, as Sophia checked her email, she noticed a subject line that made her pause. "We'd like to share your story." It was from a national news outlet that had picked up on the lawsuit and the reforms it inspired. Sophia showed the email to Marcus. "They want to do a feature on our story," she said. "They think it could inspire other families to speak out." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's a big platform. If it helps other kids, I think we should do it." Amara overheard the conversation and looked up from her sketchpad. "Does that mean people will know what happened to us?" she asked. Sophia knelt beside her. "Yes, but they'll also know how brave you were. Your story could help a lot of kids feel less alone." Amara smiled softly. "Okay, if it helps, then let's do it." The feature aired weeks later, highlighting the Walkers' journey and the changes they fought for. Letters and emails poured in from families across the country, sharing similar experiences and thanking the Walkers for their courage. Some parents expressed their gratitude for the hope the Walkers' story had given them, while others reached out for advice on confronting their own challenges. Sophia, Marcus, and Amara reflected on the ripple effect their story had created. What began as a fight for one child's dignity had grown into a movement that was inspiring change far beyond their community. As they sat together on their porch one evening, watching Amara sketch the sunset, Sophia spoke softly. "We've been through so much, but it feels like we've found our purpose. This wasn't just about us. It was about making the world better for all kids." Marcus nodded. "And it's just the beginning." Thank you for following the Walkers' powerful journey. If you were inspired by their story, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and hope. Together, we can stand up against injustice and create a better future for everyone.